Hey people, it's Niall Stokey. Now this is from the New Yorker. This is another Black Writers video and I'm using this one, The Fires That Forged Iceberg Slim. I'm always amazed when I encounter well-read people unfamiliar with Iceberg Slim. The notion that his books circulate only in the urban ghetto's literary underground is laughable. Iceberg Slim, whose legal name was Robert Beck, burst onto the scene nearly half a century ago with his memoir Pimp, The Story of My Life, 1967, followed immediately by the novel Trip Baby, 1967, which was adapted for the screen by Universal Pictures. During the 1970s, Beck published 3 more novels and a collection of political essays, recorded a spoken word LP, was profiled in magazines and newspapers, and became a bona fide LA celebrity. He launched a new form of crime fiction with the late Donald Goines becoming his best-known protege. Before his death in 1992, Beck had become an inspiration and eminent scribe for gangster rap. Sociologists, anthropologists, and linguists of the ghetto had granted Pimp a certain ethnographic authority when it first appeared. After hip-hop became a subject of academic study, Beck's work returned to the ivory tower, appearing in cultural studies courses and literary journals, and in Peter Muckley's 2003 book Iceberg Slim, The Life as Art. In 2012, Ice-T and George Hinojosa produced the entertaining and revealing documentary Iceberg Slim, Portrait of a Pimp, which both celebrated and humanized its subject. As I write this, Pimp is the #1 bestseller on Amazon in the category Philosophy of Good and Evil, beating out The End of Faith by the less colorful writer Sam Harris. The new book, Street Poison, the biography of Iceberg Slim by Justin Gifford, is an exercise in demystification. We learn that Beck's off-code claim of having an IQ of 175 was false, and the iceberg was just a nom de plume that Beck invented while writing Pimp. His actual street name was Kavanaugh Slim. Having conned, cajoled, and terrorized his way through the underworld, Beck ironically proved to be a perfect mark for Holloway House, his longtime publisher, whose minuscule royalty checks never matched their extraordinary sales figures. The great story in Straight Poison is not about the making of a pimp, but about the making of a writer and self-styled political prophet. Robert Moppins Jr. was born in Chicago to Mary Brown and Robert Moppins in 1918, reborn as Kavanaugh Slim in the streets of Milwaukee in the 1930s, and reborn again as Robert Beck in Los Angeles in 1963, where he chose to honor his mother by taking her late husband's last name. Iceberg Slim was born circa 1965, following the assassination of Malcolm X and the uprising of Watts. Refashioning himself as an old ex-crook turned revolutionary, he wrote Pimp as an act of redemption. Perhaps my remorse for my ghastly life, he declared in the preface, will diminish to the degree that within this one book I have been allowed to purge myself. Perhaps one day I can win respect as a constructive human being. While poverty is what inspired Beck and his common-law wife Betty to transmute his dark memories into a book, Pimp was also meant to be a contribution to the Black Revolution. Instead, it catapulted the Pimp into American popular culture's pantheon of celluloid heroes and outlaws. To be fair, Pimp is not responsible for glamorizing pimps. The figure of the pimp has been revered and reviled in African American culture and for more than a century, all through tales, toasts, bawdy oral poetry, and song. What Beck did was take the cartoon image of the pimp projected in urban rhymes and strutting street characters, and give him flesh, history, and dimension, exposing the dehumanizing brutality of the game. And he did so when ghettos were in revolt and Black Americans had become an object of worldwide fascination. If Beck set out to cast a critical light on pimping, why did young cats turn to his books for advice on how to be better pimps? How could an author whose sales figures topped 2 million in just a few years have been so radically misunderstood? Why haven't his other books, especially his political essays, received nearly as much attention as his debut? Gifford doesn't answer those questions, but his revelations about Beck's political life and personal demons offer some clue. His book helps one to see why Beck could probably never kill the pimp without killing a part of himself, and why when the fires of rebellion began to peter out, voyeurism and titillation prevailed. When Beck first decided to write the story, he was working exterminator and living in South Los Angeles with a young white woman named Betty Mae Shue, her toddler son, and their newborn daughter. It was Betty who proposed committing Beck's stories to paper, Betty who found the publisher, and Betty who transcribed and typed Beck's manuscripts. It was around this time that the Watts Rebellion in August of 1965 shook Beck to his core. His initial fears for his family's safety gave way to an appreciation for the new mood in the community. Former gang members joined political organizations like the Sons of Watts and later the Black Panther Party. Local youth turned a damaged furniture store into the What's Happening coffee house, a hangout for would-be militants, artists, and intellectuals. The radical Jewish screenwriter Bud Schulberg launched the Watts Writers' Workshop, which Beck would eventually come to support. Amid a veritable cultural revolution, the autobiography of Malcolm X appeared in print just months after Malcolm's murder. Beck said that he modeled his own memoir on the autobiography, telling the interviewer years later, Malcolm X defined the atrocity that pimping is. Beck may have also identified with Malcolm because both men had unresolved conflicts with their mothers. Malcolm's mother was institutionalized when he was 13. Beck traced his personal trajectory to two traumatic events: being sexually abused by a babysitter and being ripped away from a loving, stable stepfather. Both of these things happened as he saw it because of choices that his mother made. This produced within Beck an intense hatred of her, which led to a hatred of all women. According to a prison psychiatrist, that hatred drove Beck to pimping. Dogged by recurring nightmares of whipping his mother as if she were a slave, Beck spent much of his time at Leavenworth Penitentiary, where he was imprisoned in the mid-1940s, reading Freud, Jung, and Carl Menninger. Rather than overcoming his feelings, however, he used his new knowledge after his release to better subjugate his prostitutes. Then, in 1962, sitting in Chicago's notorious Cook County Jail on the verge of madness, he realized that freedom from pimping required reconciling with his mother. Upon his release, he raced to Los Angeles so he could spend the rest of her days together. The potential radical implications of Beck's epiphany were blunted, though, by the era's new militant masculinity, which was fueled by a direct confrontation with state violence and reinforced by Daniel Patrick Moynihan's The Negro Family, a case for national action, published like Malcolm's autobiography in 1965. The controversial report blamed black women, or rather an entrenched matriarchal culture, for sexual promiscuity, street crime, and the poverty that plagued black communities. Even close readers of Pimp, such as the comedian actor Chris Rock, glibly attribute Beck's downward spiral to Beck's mother, but Beck does no such thing. Instead, he blames himself for harboring misplaced hatred and concedes that his road to redemption was paved by his mother's unconditional love. Perhaps it's no accident that Pimp, Beck's most popular work, is also his least political. Trip Baby, which centers on a biracial pimp whose lighter skin allows him to move through both black ghettos and white high society, is an adroit expose of race and class in America. The protagonist, known to his friends as white folks, attends a dinner party where he witnesses a racist police chief and a liberal capitalist propose solutions to the Negro problem. The cop aims to use state violence and incarceration to crush black civil rights protests, while the capitalist master plan is to drive a wedge between educated black elites and the working class. By the end of the 1960s, Beck had developed a reputation as a public intellectual, even as he continued to struggle financially. A popular lecturer, he spoke on topics ranging from the sex trade to the history of the Puritans, sounding more like a young black militant than an aging ex-pimp. In a lecture at Chicago's Malcolm X College, Beck told the students, "When you exploit your own kind, you are in effect a counter-revolutionary." Not surprisingly, Beck praised the Black Panthers in spite of the contempt local members showed him. In his eyes, they were the authentic champions and heroes of the black race, categorically superior to that older generation of physical cowards of which I am a part. Beck described meeting the Black Panthers in his most enigmatic and overlooked book, The Naked Soul of Iceberg Slim, 1971. Subtitled The Real Robert Beck, this slender collection of essays was his manifesto. Inspired by James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, but bearing a closer resemblance to Julius Lester's Revolutionary Notes, the essays were not meant as a repudiation of Pimp, rather they could be read as a kind of Hegelian synthesis, produced from the unity of opposites. Kavanaugh Slim, thesis, and Robert Beck, antithesis. Hence his dedication of the book to Malcolm X, Angela Davis, Huey Newton, and George Jackson, as well as all the street niggers and strugglers in and out of the joints. The essay covers a range of topics from a psychosexual history of lynching and the black bourgeoisie to police violence and pimping. Mixing personal reflections and political commentary on the essays argue that white supremacy and class rule in America are fragile. A police state created ostensibly for the stomping down of the niggers and the new left would soon become a horror state for all people. He muses in one particularly prescient passage, "Revolution, Beck's view, was not only necessary but inevitable." He wrote, "America is being led to her death by racist power junkies coasting on a stupid trip, the fatal fantasy that soldiers and police can destroy with clubs and guns and an indestructible force, the hunger of the human soul for dignity, justice, and freedom." Beck began to soften his stance on pimps and sex workers. His critique of the black elite hardened. He complained about black columnists who flay black pimps and whores as criminals, while fiends in blue blood let in the black ghetto unseen and uncondemned. In Socratic style, he and an old hustler friend excoriate the black elite in respectability politics. Beck wonders if they are so poisoned with bias and bigotry for other types of black people that their public images are a fraud and their lives a lie. Can any black man really be a leader, a humanitarian, and champion of black advancement who tries only to understand and help the progress of those blacks who he probably believes will become social mock-ups of himself? Beck's defense of other types of black people is perhaps represented what is arguably his finest novel, Mama Black Widow, 1969. A sympathetic portrayal of the trials and tribulations of Otis Tilson, a black drag queen whose family moves from the deep south to Chicago in search of opportunity. Instead, they get misery, violence, and unremitting poverty. Otis is harassed by the police, beaten by other black men, and he repeatedly raped. He finds community and a modicum of protection in Bronzeville's gay community. There was somehow a sweet and wonderful atmosphere of equality and brotherhood among queers. I guess they were so despised and discriminated against in the straight world that mutual anguish and suffering they found emotional sanctuary amongst themselves. By 1971, Beck was reportedly one of the best-selling black authors in the country, but according to Gifford's autobiography, he earned little income thanks to Holloway House's creative accounting methods. His brood had ballooned to 3 daughters and a son, and he needed revenue. His fortunes changed the following year when Universal Pictures bought the rights to Trick Baby for $25,000. Although the movie was by most accounts a creative disaster, it enabled the family to abandon South Los Angeles for the Hollywood Hills, and it provided enough stability for Beck to turn his attention to writing screenplays. He also began to enjoy a kind of fame that would gradually lure him away from his family towards a Hollywood lifestyle that occasionally resembled the pimp world he had left behind. Betty, tired of his absences, his philandering, his lack of productivity, took the kids and left. Rumors notwithstanding, Beck never slipped back into life, but his interviews in the 1970s revealed creeping nostalgia for pimping, especially after blaxploitation cinema took off. He began to play the hustler, dispensing pimp wisdom and deftly cashing in on his aura. His publicity photos from the time evoked the old Iceberg Slim, sprawled on his bed or lounging on an overstuffed couch, sporting an ascot or a wild suit, posing in front of his Lincoln hair pressed and curled. In 1973 profile, Women's Wear Daily, he reminisces how about in the golden days of pimping, it was an art that required cunning, agility, and speed. And yet in the same interview, he praises black women for their strength and persevering in the face of unrelenting abuse. Perhaps this is the Iceberg Slim synthesis. Pimps are not only capable of redemption, they exhibit the power and masculinity the militants lack. They're open defiance of the restriction of morality and the conventional ways of society, told one reporter. Render pimps unoppressed heroes in a limited context who stand with their psychological balls intact. Beck's 1977 novel Death Wish, about the mafia in Chicago, even suggests ways to channel gangster masculinity towards socially productive ends. In a subplot resembling Sam Greenlee's 1969 novel, The Spook Who Sat by the Door, a couple of anti-mafia gangsters organize an underground paramilitary unit to rob dope dealers and numbers runners in order to finance a drug rehabilitation center. Beck understood that writing was a form of entertainment and a hustle, as well as a political act. Even as he flirted with the Panthers and swapped his nightmares for revolutionary dreams, he knew his greatest commodity was his street cred, and he pimped it even as he disavowed it. This ambivalence kept him from leaping headlong into the movement, but also mirrored the urban proletariat's love-hate relationship with a laissez-faire capitalism that rewards and celebrates those who obtain wealth by any means necessary. It became hard to listen to lectures from characters who flash bulging money clips and diamond-studded teeth. Still, Iceberg Slim was forged in the fires of Watts. Just as the sharpest lyrical critics from his gangster rap descendants, Ice-T and Ice Cube, were shaped by the LA Rebellion of 1992 and by the slow burn of deindustrialization and drug wars that preceded it. The new film, Straight Outta Compton, is a reminder how NWA's raw stories of crime, violence, and policing resonated with their times. But what the film eludes is how the pimp, in all of his unreconstructed brutality, made a comeback in the era of reality rap. NWA's final album, Niggas for Life, made without Ice Cube, includes such tracks as Find 'em, Fuck 'em, and Flee, and One Less Bitch, in which Dr. Dre assumes the role of a pimp who murders his prostitute for holding back a few dollars. Released a couple of months after the LAPD beat Rodney King and a store proprietor in South Los Angeles fatally shot the 15-year-old Natasha Hollins over a bottle of orange juice, Niggas for Life shot to the top of the charts, selling more than 2 million copies in the US alone. A year later, LA blew up. Perhaps the old adage that pimps never die, they multiply is true, but only as long as violence thrills, patriarchy prevails, women are economically vulnerable, and misogyny continues to shore up a fragile masculinity. Or as Beck might put it, the pimp's fate depends on the fire next time. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that. Please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. Peace.